part of the problem with, we were talking about American history and what it means to I guess, even be an American. Part of the problem is a republic only works if people are educated and informed. I mean, I remember watching the old jaywalking with Jay Leno bits, and if those were real, I mean, my God, even 20 years ago, people had no idea what was going on. I think it's gotten worse today. I mean, hell, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, I think she thought that there were, how many houses of Congress did she say? Or she said there were 4 houses or 4 branches of Congress. You have people in Congress that don't even know the 3 branches of government. This is a problem, or why we have a bicameral legislature. There are still Democrats arguing that states like, California should have more senators. It's like, well, they have more representatives. The 2 senators are supposed to balance out the states' rights. Then the people are supposed to, in terms of numbers, balance out the number of representatives. That's why California has more representatives than Rhode Island. If people don't understand the basic, foundation for the idea of how the country is supposed to work, voting is irrelevant. And that's why a lot of our founders believe that only very educated people should be voting. Because if you have people voting that have no idea what's going on, and they can be bought off, sometimes quite literally, but figuratively, they can be bought off with promises of, sexual preferences, LGBTQ promises, or just trivial things, then voting is an irrelevancy.
Voters have felt the wrath of one-issue voting in L.A.
Yeah.
You voted against protecting abortion, against hate, and your whole city burned. And
yes.
They just won't. And again, when you have all these people on the left, the people who should be calling for, heads to roll are like, I think they did great. I think the city did great. We're in trouble. You're in trouble.
Yeah.
Because
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, but it's just like, this desire to not offend anybody, so you continue to work, which I respect, man. You get to, like, I don't have to worry about that. I'm not an actor. I'm not a writer. I can do one thing well, and that's talk shit. So I'm a shit talker. That's what I kind of do. I'm not worried about whether I'm going to get a green light in Hollywood or not. All right? But there are people like that, to the point that they won't be honest about what's going on. And it's going to destroy the city.
Part of that is also just on a personal, individual level. I mean, human beings are emotional, and when emotions are weaponized and played upon by advertisers and through political, ideologies. And so if you can play on people's emotions, like, don't you think this about gay marriage, or don't you think this about abortion, or don't you think this about women's rights? And that's part of the problem, is we don't even have a baseline to define what a right is. A lot of people think that abortion is like a human right. Some people argue, the satanic groups literally argue, and they're suing multiple states, saying that it's a religious right to be able to kill a child. It's like anything that they can do to justify their political motivations. Meanwhile, the Constitution and the rule of law just rots somewhere in a safe. This is, I think, part of the big problem. But back to the emotional thing, it's like, as an individual, you don't want to be wrong. And if you don't want to be wrong, well, you'd find anything and everything to justify why maybe you were wrong, but you were still kind of right. And so that's why you still defend the Democrat Party. You still defend the Republican Party. It's not about logic or objectivity. Like you were saying earlier, if somebody does something good, it's like good. And if someone does something bad, it's like, well, bad. That's objectively how the system should ideally work. But as Alexander Tytler, a Scottish professor, pointed out, these kinds of systems can only run a handful of generations before they collapse, because people will not be educated. And what will happen is people will realize they can just vote themselves into office, in a sense. They can vote for the most handouts. They can vote for the most, personal privileges, special privileges. And that's what we see happening across the country, which is why I personally am not very hopeful of any administration, because I think that the people, just like in Rome, are largely responsible for the decline. It's not because of corrupt politicians per se. It's because people are corrupt in morals and values, and they lack them entirely. They are poor and void of knowledge of how it's supposed to work, even just the basic concepts. And when that happens, the system fails and falls.
Yeah, well, it's almost you're a victim of success as well. Yes, that's true. There's a generation that's grandparents, work their asses off. Mothers too. There we go. Work their asses off, create a great life, and you were born in luxury, and you've never ever felt anything. So you can vote for idealism. You can, when all your needs are taken care of, you start to, you need purpose, and your purpose becomes this thing that will never be solved. You know, global warming, transgender rights, racism, homophobia. All these things that there will never be an end line for.
Just like terrorism with the Bush administration. Terrorism, a never-ending, undefinable thing or redefinable thing that can never really be solved.
Especially when you're funding it all the time.
Yeah, especially when you're funding it.
I mean, 100%. It's just like, and like nobody's understanding. Like, I over the weekend I played this great club, the Comedy Vault. Great club. Love everybody, Liz and everybody at the Comedy Vault. It's a top shelf A-list club. It's amazing to play it. And it's a small, like predominantly white suburb outside of Chicago. And I go, how many people here would love to not pay federal taxes? And just a couple people clapped. And I'm like, do you guys have Stockholm syndrome? Do you guys have any clue? Because they don't know how anything works. They don't educate them, because that's the whole goal. Dumb, unhealthy, can't pay attention how your government works, which is this Federal Reserve is printing money to destroy everything, all of humanity. The British Crown, the Bank of England realized they had a real problem with Germany, and they had to destroy it from within, but they couldn't compete, so they hijacked the Federal Reserve of America. Not they didn't hijack, but they basically turned it in to the bank that funds everything wrong with the world. Everything wrong with the world.
The British Empire consolidated completely into a bank, and the Roman Empire consolidated into a church, and the big banks and the big churches, they all push the same narratives and the same agendas.
Yeah, you see that right now with the Catholic Church in deep shit because they're fighting this immigration. This they're fighting against deporting illegals, and now it's finding out that they were instrumental in it. That George Soros and all these...
Well, the backpacks. Don't you remember these kids were crossing with backpacks and brand new shoes? You're like, who's giving him this to cross the whole fucking
the Catholic Church. And it gets into...
The Catholic Church supports it. HIAS, the Hebrew group, supports it. HIAS. There's a lot of international groups and NGOs that support it of all different affiliations. Jewish groups, Christian groups.
And where do these NGOs get a lot of this money? We're through these back channels, which all comes from the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve prints funny money.